So I finally went out and saw Dunkirk. Now I'm a little bit late to the party, I guess, but where I live, the cinemas were fully booked for a considerable amount of time, and we had to book 2 weeks in advance just to get our seats in the IMAX. So yeah, it has taken us some time to finally see the movie, but I have done so. And since I've been getting a lot of questions on the movie from you guys on either my Twitch or my Twitter or in the YouTube comment section, I want to talk about it a little bit. Now, I'm not gonna do an in-depth video about the movie just yet. I think I want to watch it a couple of times more, and that's probably going to happen when it is released on DVD or Blu-ray or something like that. And then I can maybe make a more in-depth video, especially about some of the air combat scenes, which seem to be getting a lot of flack from people, and I kind of do want to talk a little bit about them today, but in an upcoming project in a couple of months we'll probably address it a little bit more, if at that point it is still relevant, because it might not be. From all the comments that I've been getting, I've been pooling a few points together, and I want to have a quick discussion on those things. As I said, maybe in the future I'll make a more in-depth video on it. Now, some of the criticism that has been given to the movie that is, and by the way, if you have not seen the movie, there will be, it's really hard to spoil the movie like Dunkirk, because we all know what happens. But yes, I will be talking about a few specific scenes in the movie. So if you don't want to hear about those things, you best tune out now. Anyway, one of the points that has been addressed towards me was that the Stuka sirens were wrong and that they're not as we think the Stuka sirens were. First of all, I think it's incredibly hard to exactly know the sound of the Stuka. There is that one sound that everybody knows that is commonly attributed to the Stuka siren, and it's been used in every Hollywood blockbuster. Whenever a plane comes crashing down, for some reason there is that sound. I actually made a video about the Stuka siren specifically in one of my last projects, so if you haven't seen that, you can also check that out, and I address some of these points as well. There are some recorded sound bits from that time that supposedly sound just like the Stuka, but I think we're not 100% sure how it actually sounded. Until the point where we actually have a Stuka that is flight-worthy and we can put a siren on it, we will not know 100% for sure how that siren sounds like. Anyway, that is beside the point. We do have that one sound that is commonly attributed to the Stuka, and it wasn't used in the movie Dunkirk, which prompted a lot of comments from some people. Now, personally, I think this is actually a good thing, and let me explain that. The Stuka sound is a sound that we are all used to. We are completely desensitized to it. It is nothing special to us. It is not frightening. It is not in any way or shape or form something that we would consider to elicit an emotional response. Now, what the Dunkirk creators have done is essentially create an alternative sound, which also a little bit blends into the music, and they've created a sound which is, in a sense, also extremely frightening. So you do really feel like those soldiers are under attack, or are on a dive bomber attack. And the Stuka siren, even if it's not the quote-unquote correct sound, it does give that emotional response that the real sound would have. But, as I said, the sound that we think the Stuka has, we're completely desensitized to it. So that's my little theory as to why perhaps they didn't go back to the sound that is, common in every Hollywood blockbuster, and created a new sound that kind of creates that same emotional response, but is not the sound that we commonly attribute to the Stuka siren. That's a little theory that I have. The second thing that everybody has been mentioning to me is that the aerial combat is really bad. Well, in many ways I agree. The aerial combat is nothing like the real thing, and I wasn't a combat pilot in World War II, so you might say, what kind of judgment can I make? I read a lot of memoirs, I read a lot of books, but that's beside the point. However, there are people that are fighter pilots that have looked at it, and there's one example. For example, it's the American Chuck Yeager. So if you might know him, he's quite a well-known figure in American aviation, and he was a very successful fighter pilot in his time, and he himself has tweeted on this. It looks nothing like the real thing, and it is nothing like the real thing. The Germans, they don't fly like the 109s you would expect the 109s to fly, and there's a lot of convenience. They don't really avoid the Spitfires and so on. And so a lot of that was a little bit stale. However, here are two things that I want to say about that. First of all, since they relied on practical effects and on real aircraft, I think there was a big problem about limited resources, maybe even about budget limitations, and also risk assessments. They don't want to take these machines up into the sky and make any kind of like dives, power dives or zoom climbs, aileron rolls, barrel rolls, and all the stuff that we are spoiled in a sense of when it comes to Hollywood, because they use a lot of CGI in other movies that have fighter planes. They probably couldn't do that simply because there's a risk attached to it, and since the resources they were using are in a sense historical artifacts. There's not a lot of planes from that time frame that still fly, and the fact that they can actually use those planes, and fair enough, the combat maybe wasn't up to par with what we often seen in Hollywood, and yes, some of the scenes were a little bit too convenient. Don't really know what exactly went into making those scenes, so I'm holding off my judgment for a little bit there. Now you might say this is a little bit of a cheap way out, but here's the thing. What I've noticed is that a lot of people have been specifically blasting the movie for its air combat scenes. However, at the same time, those people that supposedly want realistic and authentic air combat have not gone through the trouble of actually showing or commenting where the movie did it really well when it comes to aerial combat, or not really aerial combat, but how these planes were used. Because in specific scenes in that movie, we see stuff that we have never, ever in a summer blockbuster when it comes to the operation of the aircraft. I'm talking about how the Spitfire pilot, it's just small details, but how the Spitfire pilots presses on a button to check its fuel. That's what they had to do. I'm talking about using chalk to mark down how much fuel they have at a specific amount of time, how they use the map to navigate, how they talk about their fuel consumption. Should we climb or should we not climb? If we climb, we'll be safer, but we'll use more fuel and so on. Then how they have to use a hand crank to lower the gear when the hydraulic system fails. How they have the pistol when the one pilot, his canopy, he opens his canopy, then he closes again. He's not sure how he wants to ditch or crash land, and then he tries to use his pistol to bang against the release and so on. And all of that stuff shows that the people that made this movie actually really looked in depth and in detail as to how pilots operated at that moment in time. And this is also why I think that the aerial combat wasn't done bad because they didn't know better, or it wasn't done bad because they didn't want to show real action sequences. It was probably a result of limited resources, risk assessments, and simply saying, okay, well, we want something that represents it, that is in a way authentic, even if it is not realistic. Because there is a lot of thought put into the operation of the aircraft. And the list goes on. We were talking about how Tom Hardy then burns his Spitfire with a flare gun to avoid it being captured by the enemy, which is realistic. That's what pilots would do. They would burn their own plane if they landed behind enemy lines, because that plane, not only is it an asset, but it is also a technological asset. Yeah, if that plane gets in the hands of the Germans, they can evaluate the Spitfire. So you want to avoid that, and that's why pilots always burned or tried to burn their own aircraft if there was a least chance that it would fall into the enemy hands. And it's those kind of things that show to me that they knew what they were doing. They have looked at how planes operated, they have looked at how pilots operated. And yes, there are scenes that could have been probably done better, but there is a lot of detail in this movie. And it's funny that, I see a lot of people blasting it for the air combat, but at the same time, they don't really seem to be enjoying the parts where it did really, really well. So that is my take on this air combat and how much detail was actually put into the aircraft and so on. And I felt that the little details are incredible. It's something that we haven't seen yet in the movie, and it's something that deserves to be shown, and it really does give credit to the movie in a sense, in my opinion. Now there is one scene that I will say that I felt a little bit annoyed with. There's just one scene, and that is at the very end. Now, if you might remember, there is a single Stuka. When the little boats come in, there's a single Stuka that attacks the beach. And then Tom Hardy, even though his Spitfire has no longer any kind of propulsion, somehow manages to shoot it down. In my opinion, that is the one scene that actually ripped me out of the experience, and it's the one scene that movie could have done without. It is completely unnecessary. And at that point, it goes a little bit into waving the Spitfire flag a little bit, which the movie really didn't need. That scene was completely unnecessary. Also, why would a single Stuka attack the beach? Yeah. And then this is, of course, we were once again talk about them using RC planes. I think when it came to the Stuka, and them only having a limited amount of Spitfires. I think they had like 3 and 2 Spanish 109s. and one Heinkel, one A11, if I remember correctly. Of course, they're limited to what they have, but I think the movie would have been better without that one specific scene. And when the Stukas attack earlier, I think they come in a group of threes. Again, not a lot of Stukas. They would generally operate with a larger contingent. However, you do get the authentic feeling of a Stuka attack. Even though it's maybe not done in a realistic manner, because there should be more Stukas, you get that feeling of authenticity. But that one scene without one single Stuka attack was completely unnecessary. That is my biggest criticism to this movie, from seeing it once in IMAX. So anyway, I hope you guys also saw Dunkirk and that you enjoyed it. If you did, or if there's stuff that you want to criticize, leave it down in the comment section below. I know there's a lot of nitpicking going on, of course, but I think I've kind of made clear why I give the movie a certain pass when it comes to the air combat, because I do feel that they knew what they were doing when it comes to these aircraft. They listened to the real pilots, they've done their research, and they've shown us detail that we have not seen before. And I think that's great. Now, before I forget, I actually have to add one little thing, and this is something I just remembered before rendering this video. It's that, of course, there were Dunkirk veterans, or veterans that survived the Dunkirk evacuation, that saw this movie. And you know what, I gotta say, I didn't hear them complaining about, the Enfield didn't sound like the Enfield really sounded and so on. Actually, personally, I don't know how the Enfield sounds. I don't know if that's a good point of criticism, but they had, an emotional reaction to the movie. They felt it was authentic. It was extremely hard for them probably to watch that movie, but they did anyway. And I think that tells us a lot about how history and how this very crucial moment in time was portrayed, and that it was an authentic experience, even though there were a few things that were perhaps not realistic, but it was authentic. And that is, I think, something we should take away from this movie, definitely. Anyway, let me know what you think, and as always, have a great day, good hunting, and see you in the sky.